Good evening and welcome to the After Hours Show. My name is Joe in Norway, and I'm joined by Ann Lee, retired college professor and community member at Daily Kos. She's a member of the National Council of Independent Scholars and is a contributor to the book, The Political Economy of Art, Making the Nation of, I lost culture, sorry. How many times do I have to do that? Yeah.
Hey, Joe.
My handwriting and my memory are fading.
You're in the club.
I hope yours is in much better condition than mine.
Oh, God. It's bad stuff over here in the States.
Yeah. What's happening?
All kinds of crap. Anyway.
It's getting harder and harder to muster up the energy to make meals, given the circumstances around the ongoing wars and pestilence and whatnot. I'll try anyways. I'll just say what we're gonna cook this evening, and then we can discuss a little bit of the more unsavory topics.
Disillusioning, all things considered. Today they is the Georgia the one in Georgia. They're trying to discredit the prosecutor.
Your sound is cutting out on me. Everybody hear okay? Or is it my sound?
No, I heard it cut out.
Okay. Maybe she'll come up. So what I'll be making this evening are vada or pakora, Indian appetizer, fried fritter, basically, from our beloved legume family. I'll be making green mung bean fritters, basically. Where I'm going with my bean appreciation series. Trying to maybe Bruce will try these. They're really, really tasty. I'm telling you, you're gonna love them. You're gonna love them. And they're a little appetizer for what we'll be seeing later, the Discovery of India documentary that Harsh has been showing. It's episode 4 this week, the caste culture, or what was the name of the title there regarding the caste.
Before that will be Twilight Zone.
Indeed.
Mung, yes, you have to track down those little mungs. Is that traps?
Yeah, so Aaron Bushnell, active duty airman, self-immolated in front of the Israeli embassy, and was quite live streamed it on Twitch, and quite clearly stated what he was doing.
Indeed.
By all of the words he used, it seemed pretty clear to me that he was protesting. This was extreme protest, the most extreme you can probably do against the ongoing genocide and his inability to take part in it anymore. And considering the Air Force is quite intimately helping out with Israel, I'm not sure what his position was and what he's been doing, but it's completely understandable. But the reaction in the media is, shall we say, less than stellar, or they should get awards for keeping up with the rigid strictures of the propaganda, Chomsky and Herman propaganda model. It's just incredible.
Darn levers of power.
As an example, this headline in the Post was basically someone pointed out on Twitter how this essentially hits all of the misinformation, propaganda cues, and keeps us avoiding dealing with the actual issue. Airman who set self on fire grew up on religious compound and had anarchist past. It's phenomenal, you know. It's like the Israelis are killed and Palestinians expire or die. All of that, the passive voice, set self on fire, purposely avoiding self-immolation. So it's tying him to a religious nuttery, living in a compound like a wacko, and the ever fearful anarchist. And it's just amazing they do this, and it hasn't really changed in all these decades, except with the speed and maybe the volume at which it comes out now due to the internet.
Yeah, it's only a couple of days, and already you have international framing of the event. The one Israeli publication tried to frame it simply because it was a suicide. It disclaimed any viability it had as a moral act of protest, which was a really tough slog if you want to think about how to argue the point.
That's amazing. Lost my notes. Oh, sorry.
Carry on. It is interesting. He did grow up in a religious compound, a Massachusetts, a small Massachusetts community that it does exist as a compound that has multiple living residents, has a subgroup that is that are nuns technically, and has
somewhat of a commune, or
no, it's well, I think people do call it a cult. It's called the Community of Jesus. It's been around for a while, since the 50s, I think, and is a little bit isolated with respect, and has been the subject of a variety of legal actions about abusive activity. That is, and I would assert that, well, in the coverage, more specifically the New York Times coverage, speaking of people who frame stories, he apparently his decision to move forward to self-immolate is a the result of a kind of a triggered personal trauma of some kind that had sort of brought him back. But while he was while he was in the Air Force, he was actually about to stop being. He wasn't a career Air Force person. He was ending his hitch, so to speak. His 4-year, I think it's a 4-year obligation for Air Force personnel, and so he was going to leave. And I think that there was some precipitating event described by people who knew him. And that was part of the motivation, aside from the actual political elements, and that he contacted a local political group, which is it's hard to describe. It could be described as a Trotskyist party. It actually has a fair story, separated from a variety of socialist, the SWP, the Socialist Worker Party, and there are a variety of parties, and ultimately getting to the Party of Socialism and Liberation. Whether they're anarchists or not is a whole different question. And but the reality, of course, is that they were kind of the people who were local to him, proximal in San Antonio, and that's kind of where his anti-war position came from. His biggest concern, that friends describe it as, was homelessness. His whole thing about homelessness was very
helping
devoted.
the homeless as opposed to being on.
Yes, so he was doing a lot of interesting things in terms of his finally being away from, if you want to call it a Christian cult. It has two things associated with it. Used to have a college, or associated with a college in Ontario, that also had these abuse elements built into it. It really is much like some cults. The idea that you create a either by abuse or terror or otherwise a kind of culture of obedience. Anyway, back to you.
I thought we've been hearing people quote this excerpt from a letter that Thich Nhat Hanh wrote to Martin Luther King Jr. regarding the self-immolation of Vietnamese Buddhist monks.
Yes,
which is probably one of the main images that triggers in the mind when you think of self-immolation of a certain generation. To burn oneself by fire is to prove that what one is saying is of the utmost importance. There is nothing more painful than burning oneself. To say something while experiencing this kind of pain is to say it with utmost courage, frankness, determination, and sincerity. And Aaron's dying words were free Palestine. And no matter how they, at least there's documentation of the act. So there is actual proof of what happened. And it'll still be distorted by the media and downplayed, but hope it's a wake-up call within the armed forces and within the higher ranks of the administration.
It was an excellent example of how framing operates, though, that it was spun in all kinds of directions, that trying to prove that he was a radical. I think that he simply, it was a moral position that had a certain amount of faith built into it, whatever that faith might have been.
Well, I should probably get cooking here.
Yeah.
My want to review the ingredients here. We've got mung dahl. So this is the same that you find in your bean sprouts, except you can buy it split. So it radically reduces cooking time. And then if you soak it in water like I have done here, it'll make it much quicker to cook. And what I'm going to do is this will be turned into a batter. So I'm gonna rub the husks off and try to filter out as much of that as I can so that we make it a nice smoother paste. A little less earthy, but you can leave it in, it doesn't matter. And then I'll be adding cumin seeds and nigella or onion seeds, which is my favorite, ginger, chili, and red onion, and cilantro, coriander, as our friends in England refer to it, and other places abroad. And also be using asafoetida, or it's a rhizome synonymous with Indian cooking. And I was wondering if Harsh might be able to talk about hing or asafoetida. Harsh around by chance?
Oh, yeah. So hing, we usually add it to everything, actually. It's usually for digestive purposes. If it's spicy.
To the beans.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Beans, obviously, yeah, you have to do that.
Yeah.
But usually it's for everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, like, it's like one of the home remedies. If you have like a stomach ache or something, take some hot water, add hing to it, and then drink it. It's awful. It's horrible to taste. It stinks as well, but that's supposed to keep like make you better as well.
Now, I've not had the chance of having it, the fresh resin from the rhizome, but I've heard that it's called devil's dung in English. Is that why the stench from it is so strong?
It could be. It's awful. It's bad.
I'm always uncertain how much to use. Sometimes they're calling for a pinch, just a pinch.
Yeah, just a pinch.
But doesn't that have to do with how diluted it is? Because it's like, for example, this is like the only one you can get around here in most places that I've seen in the West, Delhi, and it has rice flour, gum arabic, asafoetida, which is 7% of it, and then turmeric. And then our famous turmeric code number 75300. Yikes. Don't let James hear that.
You've never seen a diluted one, so can't say.
To go with the naming as well, vada, bhajia, pakora, are they all different or different names or different dishes entirely?
Right. So vada, so it depends. So the vada that you are making, so in
These are
North,
the drop ones, not the ones with the hole in them.
Yeah, the mung dal one, right? Not the one without the skin, like without green thing, right? So
well, it'll have some of the skin. I'm gonna rinse it off, but yeah, it's not the yellow one or the white or all.
Got it. So the one that you're making, that's like a fritter, right? So in the central part of the country, so where my parents are from, they call it mangore, but it's like it's just like a fritter. But then up north, like near Delhi, Punjab, and like northern region, you take this, you make it like a flat, not a flat, but like a bigger fritter kind of thing, and you dip it in yogurt, like curd, and that becomes dahi vada. You add like different chutneys on it, and that's how you eat it. And you take the same thing, and in South, you shape it in a donut, like in the savory format, and you add it with sambar. That's a vada as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's what I'm
different things.
And then pakora is something totally different.
Yeah, that has besan.
Okay, yeah. So there's using mung or chickpeas, basically, or the difference there. Besan is chickpea flour. Correct? Sure. So for the dipping, I'll be making a mint chutney with coriander seeds. No, these are going in the vada with mustard and chili and ginger, and I've got some Dutch apple, well, it's Norwegian apple molasses to give it a little tanginess. So I'll get cooking, and I assume there's an update on Ukraine shortly.
Oh yes, I will do a bit of yammer on Ukraine. It is been a tough week. The munitions are not coming fast enough for they're not being transferred quickly enough to the Ukrainians. And there have been advances. The Russians are trying to do a little run up before their election. As long as Putin can get rid of his real or imagined opponents.
So Tucker Carlson was playing to the domestic audience there. Heard he racked up a lot of numbers.
Well, I think he'll wind up
80 million.
I don't know what his demo looks like, and I'm not sure about his Q rating in Russia. But yeah, that's they're doing that. So advances on all fronts, unfortunately, for the Russians, but these advances are maybe a couple of kilometers, aside from the fact that the Ukrainians lost Avdiivka, which is on the one hand, a major loss. On the other hand, pretty much every building is destroyed in the town. But it is a key part of the rail system that leads to Donetsk. So and it has a particular place. It's a physical feature that is that it's sort of a valley. Ukrainians fled to the high ground, and so they're doing a sort of dynamic retreat, as it were, but they're not retreating very far. As I said, a couple of kilometers. But the Russians are attacking in at least three different areas, and I think a lot of it is driven by the propaganda need to show that there's no defeats occurring. On the other hand, other things they're not paying attention to, and in the past 11 days, 13 pieces of aircraft have gotten shot out of the sky by the Russians by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have figured out a way, I think, to spoof Russian radar so that a Su-34 that the Russians have been using Su-34s to launch what are called glide bombs. The Americans use them too. They're called in the American context JDAM. They're essentially a dumb bomb with a telemetry attachment latched onto the munitions, and they make more dumb bombs than smart bombs, and it's a cheaper way of launching a munition without firing it as a missile. And so you could send a half ton of ordnance of explosive onto a site with fair GPS aiming. The problem, of course, is that you have to launch it from an airplane, and the Su-34, a fighter bomber, somehow has been very vulnerable, and a bunch of them have been shot. They've been shooting one or two a day, and it is probably a little disconcerting for they're about $4 or $5 million a pop, so it fairly expensive, and it's not the top of the line fighter bomber, needless to say, but the Russians have a lot of them, and so I've been putting up on Coast at least the counter media that shows that there's a lot of things being shot down. They lost at least 10 majors, I think a colonel. The last time they shot down an A-50, it had a crew of a lot of officers. They managed to get a general the time before. I think they're down to 2 or 3 A-50 AWACS. They're, they have a lot of electronics. They do electronic warfare, and they have accompanying smaller planes that do jamming. So there is a kind of a gap in the technology that the Ukrainians are exploiting by shooting down fairly expensive pieces of equipment, but also as a result of the use of a glide bomb technology, which does force their bombers to come closer. And so that's at least what is part of the reporting from Ukraine. Other things, of course, are the now Europe is pretty much taking a position on GOP opposition to funds for Ukraine, and there's still negotiating going on, and it is still as ugly as ever. But I think the world knows which side the GOP is on. The American Republicans are on. Sort of sad when the presidents of various countries make comments on the GOP, and doesn't look, not a good look, if anything. Other matters are the usual. It was sort of a feint and a fake, I suppose, with the Transnistria threat is no longer there. There seemed to be a little agitation and some disinformation about the small breakaway portion of Moldova called Transnistria, which aligns itself on the western border of Ukraine. Apparently, it's sort of much ado about nothing so far, anyway. But there is some agitation from pro-Russian factions in that part on the western flank. Some of it does have to do with these bomb assaults. The Russians are smarting a bit. They're sort of not putting very much seaworthy out there on the Black Sea, considering that somehow the Ukrainians have come to sink things. They're still worried that they're pushing the Ukrainians so far that they might actually bomb the Kerch Bridge, which would be really quite horrific in the sense that it would bottle up a lot of things on the Russian side. They would lose a chief logistical component of how they're operating. Otherwise, the election is coming up for Putin. He has clearly had a problem up to and including arresting people at the funeral of Alexei Navalny. It's just amazing. You'd think that, let people mourn rather than arresting them and actually creating a bigger kerfuffle across the Russian nation. There have been a couple of other minor internal sabotage events. Whoever is doing it tends to hit relay boxes along the Russian railway system. Taking out a relay, affects all kinds of things, switching, signal lights, etc. So that's happening as well. There were a couple of windups relative to the border on the Baltic side, and most of it is simply noisiness, considering that the Russians could attack the Baltic states at some moment, but it's nothing that anyone isn't prepared for, although the spin, considering Sweden's joining NATO, finally got all the votes aligned. And so while you have a press discussion that refers to a NATO sea, calling the Baltic a NATO sea. The reality, of course, is that there are nuclear weapons in Kaliningrad, and there's other things that will make a NATO participation tense. Macron claimed that he, or at least began a kind of rhetorical flourish with the idea that French troops might be used to fight in Ukraine, which was roundly criticized by a whole bunch of folks. I think in some ways it was simply a test activity, but it is boiling down to some kind of a larger NATO confrontation at some moment. It depends. We'll see. Much of this is front-ended, of course, with the election. The Russian election, it has a lot of this kind of activity rolling into the front. But that doesn't delimit the idea of opposition on a variety of fronts. Pro-Russian polls have been dropping grain loads at the border with Ukraine, and it as a kind of protest, and that's has at least bad press within the region and partially within the context of NATO. And then other issues are more revelations about Russian oil shipments, the move in the European Union to and some support from Americans, like the Treasury Secretary, supporting the idea that Russian assets could be seized and transferred to Ukraine. So there's a variety of other activity going on. It's sort of a cheap date from NATO to say that, oh, yes, well, we have X number of 155 millimeter artillery shells, and we're going to rounds, and we're going to send them to Ukraine. So there are promises, but out in the field, the Ukrainians are moving back. They're being sparing in the use of artillery to resist Russian advances. And there has been Russian advances, but I say they're very small and along the border in a variety of places. A lot more is being made of very small advances, but some of this is due to changing weather conditions. The ground is now kind of soft, and so it's going to be a little while until the spring actually arrives and warfare can actually begin in a much more serious way. Most other things that are occurring are drone strikes in the region. So that's kind of what's occurring there. It is sad to see these things all kind of complicated. The Ukrainians won't be getting a $60 billion a transfer from the United States if the legislation goes through. It's somewhere in the 40s because the GOP separated out, have separated out for a variety of reasons. This is still currently, I think, in discussion. Separated out Israeli Gaza money from that. So there's a variety of things. It's simply not about the money. It is about kind of artillery stocks and commitments that will be important. And in the American context, as people are wont to point out, none of this money goes to the coffers of Ukraine. Rather, they go to individual states in the United States, part of the military-industrial complex, to provide more materiel for the Ukrainians. It is probably, without calling it mercenary, but in fact it is, probably the safest. It's a win for the United States on one side. On the other hand, an incredible number of people are dying every day. The death toll is pretty high. Zelensky has admitted to 31,000 Ukrainian deaths, which is one of the first admissions of it, but I think it's low. The other estimates are a little higher, but still it's somewhere about half of the Russians killed in action. So the differential is sort of there. Speaking of differentials, in the case of Israel Gaza, it is coming up to 30,000. It is just amazing, and there were reports today that have been debunking all of the front end. Speaking of spin, the accusations of a policy, as it were, of rape in the October 7th attack from Gaza, and the New York Times is at fault in that sense, relying on, in fact, on some questionable sources. So there's a lot of that. Although the Times has been spending more time trying to figure out where the leak came from, it is sort of revealed, I think, that the brutality was sort of ratcheted up at the front end to justify the military action of the Israelis. So that is currently kind of a thing that is going on right now.
Where was it? Who was it leaked to? I saw an Intercept report, but I
yes,
think that was just reporting on that.
The Intercept is the kind of tip of the spear on that reporting, because they were able to get a little closer to the details of actually who was doing the reporting, that there were some questionable motives of those people who were trying to create this impression that there was a policy of organized rape. That doesn't mean to say that it didn't happen, but certain things there's just no evidence for it, and that's kind of what they've been hunting down is actual. And the Intercept, discussing this with a bunch of other folks who are journalists, we're trying to hunt down, via the usual reporting methods. That is, talking to facilities.
Dare say gumshoe reporting?
Actually, a very gumshoe type reporting, shoe leather reporting. Talking to rape centers in the Israeli medical community to try to get reports of around October 7th of people treated for rape, etc. It was just very interesting to see, that they actually went and tried to figure all this out, and fog of war and all. But we still have fog of war. Gazans told to now migrate north because they're going to bomb the south, because the Israelis are going to bomb the south. And then there was the recent event where, and which does have another fog of war component of the IDF firing on people trying to get food, killing 100 people and wounding so many more. And there's fog of war there too as well. Apparently some people got run over by trucks and a variety of other things. Incredibly problematic. And so we're, that's where that war is going. It's not yet World War III, but when you think about how you would characterize a world war, it's not quite as global as you think. I mean, there were plenty of places in World War II pretty much untouched by the World War, even though there was some small action related to it. So we could have that happen again. We could have World War III with multiple countries in Europe in ground combat, aside from Ukraine, etc. So we're not quite there, but it is interesting how, if you wanted to characterize what would a global conflict look like without talking about nuclear Armageddon. So that's saber rattling did occur again. Putin in another very weird sort of set of speeches prior to the election, talking again about some sort of strange sense of national purpose and rattling another saber about nuclear weapons. So that's that happened again. It is troubling, needless to say. But we're in an election year, and a lot of people are counting on a Republican victory here to change the shape of what's going to happen in places like Ukraine. Things still are occurring apace. That is, grain shipments still are going through, and that's a good thing. It doesn't help the fact that the Ukraine is looking at multiple billions of dollars in I think it's $80 billion of essentially reparations that are necessary to fix the Ukrainian economy. Needless to say, an incredible amount of a landscape has been damaged, mainly along the border. But it is pretty true that every day there's air alerts. Not so many larger missiles. It's mainly been the kind of Iranian drones that they have a fair stock of that are being flown in. The Ukrainians are getting better technologies to thwart drone attacks. So that's one side of it. The other side, of course, are these very, very strange kind of Rube Goldberg solutions that the Ukrainians are actually pretty good at in terms of their technology, but they're really not as mechanized as they should be. Of course, the counterfactuals are all there, and pretty much the reporting continues as it is. The continuing story of the attempts to keep Ukraine going with there's still it hasn't been resolved that they're going to change the mobilization rules and laws. Their legislature is still meets and still does vote. It's not given a lot of attention, I think, in the West, but it still is moving forward. I think the issue that will ultimately occur is that Zelensky, probably because of his modifying the leadership, military leadership, is probably going to be a war president and not a post-war president. I think that questions of power with respect are relatively limited, despite the fact that he did change the military leadership. Part of that change, of course, is the result of some, you could call it disinformation. That it is the idea that Zelensky said 2 days ago that the plans for the summer, this past summer's counteroffensive, were leaked prior to any attempt to do it. So that may have been another issue, but I think that's simply disinformation. Although it seems pretty clear that the way the Russians fortified the entire battle line were problematic for a Ukrainian move forward, which was made more tense by the fact that Western advice was to do a very large kind of counterattack thrust through Zaporizhzhia, which did not occur. The hope was that they could get past the third line of kind of defense that the Russians had put in place, but that just didn't happen. And in fact, as of yesterday, there was some counterattack by the Russians to try to come back in that same area, but that's been deflected. It's just a very strange little war. It's by no means any kind of phony war. It is continuing to be problematic with sad elements. A Marine Special Operation Group, I think, was severely damaged, and no casualty numbers have been supported, but it was enough that in the same region off of Kherson, and that's been kind of widely reported. They're still fighting on the left bank, that is the southern bank of the Dnieper in Kherson, which is still likely the site of any major counterattack or counteroffensive thrust. So that's going to happen. So that's pretty much how Ukraine has gone. it is pretty clear that some things didn't happen as it should have. The transfer of F-16 seemed to have been slowed down, but I think that that's also disinformation. The certain attacks from the Russian side have been on places that would be the future site for basing F-16. So one of the biggest issues, of course, with every airplane is that you're going to need a large ground crew and infrastructure support for various airplanes. So the Russians have begun to aim at airfields that might be based where the Ukrainians would base the F-16s that are supposed to be transferred from places like Denmark and the Netherlands, all of whom have seemed not to describe whether they've transferred them or not. This is all about military and classified information. So, there could be all kinds of other activity going on, and some suggestion in disinformation that F-16s are actually operational and shooting things down. But, it's hard to prove that when you don't have independent reporting going on the battlefield, and you're sort of stuck with mainly official reporting and some sub-reporting from social media, which also had its own issues. A prominent military blogger was killed himself, which was sort of interesting. That was last week. Their activity has been delimited and by the Russians, and so that's been another issue that goes on. Much of the same things are happening. Not many reports of sabotage on the Russian side, although a couple of key cities have had strangely things happen. From the major missile site factory, anyway, catching on fire the week before, to a couple of oil refineries or storage facilities being hit fairly far behind the line. So that's also been going on. Otherwise, if you look at current think tank reporting on it, it is the case that it's going to be a tough year. Any real offensive is going to come in 2025. If then, the other issue is that the Russians are rebuilding, but they're not, and they will continue to rebuild. So this time favors the Russians in terms of that, but the personnel issue is of course important. Because while there's no full mobilization, it's certainly clear that a sufficient amount of strange recruiting is coming on with hiring a variety of mercenaries from strange countries. The Colombians have been involved, a variety of troops from very different places are being located within so the role of certain private military corporations is different now than it was before. Although the same battle orders seem to be going on. That is an attempt to attack in the northern side of the east. The whole point, of course, is to sweep the Ukrainians all the way to the Dnieper. I think the ideal from the Russian side is to take over about a third of the country, or even half of the country, all the way up to the Dnieper River. Whereas the Ukrainian hope, of course, is to kick the Russians out of everywhere and go back to the 1991 borders, or pre-2014 borders, before the Russians sent in the little green men to take over Crimea. So all of those things are happening. That's kind of where we are. What is that you're buzzing there, Joe? Oh, I see.
I'm making
Order vessel.
a mint chutney with coconut, desiccated coconut, and a little coconut milk, and my friend's apple molasses. This is it's very reminiscent of the flavor profile of tamarind, but this is made from apple reduction. And then I need some input from Harsh here, because there's so many different recipe. So this is my blender isn't strong enough to get it creamy enough, but this would be the mix with chili and spices and onion. And apparently you're supposed, all that you need to do is aerate it.
Yes. So usually cover it and keep it.
But then I also hear add baking soda or
Yes.
add baking powder.
Mhm.
Do you know? We should maybe do a
Yeah, so
test here.
at home usually we just like add some baking powder, baking soda, keep it aside for like an hour or so, and then mix it and then make it.
You know, I'm just curious because I don't know how just aerating it would lighten up the bean.
It could, but the idea is like you need that slight sour taste as well. Do you have that in this?
Which salt?
Sour taste, some sour.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you need like citron or something for the baking soda to react with.
Yes, and that's how like you add that to it.
I think
So
I'm
it's
gonna go
optional,
with I'm gonna go without for now.
yeah, should be fine.
Yeah, they're floating quite nicely, so they seem.
Nice.
What type of oil are you using, Joe?
This is sunflower. It's probably a mixture of olive oil and sunflower. That's what I had the other day.
Yeah, that looks nice actually.
It could be crispy goodness.
Professor Ryan, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I was listening to Tom Hartman today and I heard that Russia is planning on some troops, it's like they're trying to send some troops along Moldova, something.
Along where?
Moldova.
Moldova.
Oh, yes, I mentioned that a bit in Transnistria, but it is a report and not so much reality yet. There's been a lot of arm waving about it, but the Transnistrians didn't even do what they were supposed to do and make some sort of a declaration of some kind, which they didn't do. So I think it's all still saber rattling. That's anyway the reporting from American think tanks about the activity that's going on.
Okay.
But everyone's paying attention to it. It's pretty clear that they've been there's probably other activity going on that's been going on all along in Moldova, trying to shore it up because they're worried that the Russians might try to seize Moldova, and it's not a member of NATO, so there's all kinds of other issues.
I see.
Oh, then yes, there's reports of drones being launched that kind of skirt the border of Moldova, etc. And as I pointed out a while back, or they've pointed out that the southern end of Transnistria is only 50 or 60 kilometers from Odessa, so everything is fairly close together. So fortunately, Ukraine has done a job sort of sinking the amphibious attack vessels of Russia, and so that's at least been a good thing. the Black Sea being a Russian lake is still not quite there, or at least they're not committing naval resources to that. So for whatever reason, I think they were sufficiently embarrassed by large ships like the Moskva cruiser being sunk that they don't dare have another kind of bad activity.
Let's see. One thing I read, I'm not sure if it's true or not, or just random stuff, that Putin had some conditions for ceasefire or like stopping the war or something like that. Some conditions. Is it true or not?
It pops up every couple of months. It's a standard thing. And unfortunately, there are, from a diplomatic point of view, a lot of forces that would like to freeze. Now, I mean, Putin's role in the entire thing after the initial invasion is to try and freeze the lines in place. And so the talk of ceasefire comes up every couple of months. It's a constant sort of thing that I'm sure is probably badgered every day. It's a very Russian style of insistence on ceasefires. The hope, of course, on the Russian side is that various parties in the West will agree to ceasefires, and because that will allow Putin to refit and rearm, and also place the current borders where they are, which for Russia are actually quite favorable, because it essentially matches the Nouveau Russia plan, not completely, but significantly. That is taking the southeast portion of Ukraine, and essentially doubling the amount of land that was there since the 2014 invasion. So it's always a win if he can get a ceasefire. Ukrainians will not agree to a ceasefire. I don't think they're even going to be forced into a ceasefire. But we'll see. Stranger things have happened, but it's not quite there yet. I think that Ukraine will join NATO before that happens.
Oh, so ceasefire is also a tactic for land grabbing, basically.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay. If he can get that, I mean, it gives him everything that he's wanted from the front end, from the beginning. That is a complete Donetsk takeover, plus the everything south or east of the Dnieper, which from a prestige point of view is really important, aside from the social media arguing about what counts as a Ukrainian map, which is always interesting. But it's not linguistic from the point of view of people who speak Russian, although I think the issue of the bilingual nature of the Ukrainian population is always quite fascinating, considering how often it is the ability of Ukrainians to speak excellent Russian that causes trouble for the Russian side.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, where are we, Joe? Looks like it's ready to go. Joe is. Let's listen.
Hey
to
there. I thought I was
Fizzling.
unmuted. Yeah, pick it up.
Looks yummy. Yeah. There we go. Mm-mm.
Did you have something to rant about?
Oh, no, I was going
to
rant a bit about religious cults. It is democracy that allows us to have these little cults, and the New York Times did a fairly
except in
good.
Israel, not allowed in
yeah.
Israel.
Oh,
except
absolutely.
Jewish cults.
Well, it is a certain weird selectivity about the framing, because the poor fellow Aaron Bushnell grew up in a very strange, well, not a strange community so much it's very isolated. it homeschool community, fairly isolated, but I mean, fluid in the sense that Bushnell spent a year at the public high school for whatever reasons. But the continued complaints of people who have left the community of Jesus is that there was a significant amount of psychological abuse, in some cases physical abuse, and but it is a continuing community, has its own little, a very nice little church actually when you see the interior, etc. It's just that these things do exist, a fair number of them out there, certainly, probably less unfamiliar or strange in places like Utah, for example. So although there's no polygamy, I assume, in this particular community of Jesus, but it is a place that has not a lot of people who support it, but a fair number, enough to create a small compound. It's Hyannisport, but in a more religious way, I suppose. In Massachusetts, it's along Cape Cod Bay.
Are they the type of Dr. Bronner's Bragg liquid aminos type of Christian?
No, I don't think so. I think that it's just they just try and keep among themselves, but they do seem to release their youth, mainly to the military. It's a strange little.
So not like the Quaker.
No. It just seems to have a. It is as described, a charismatic kind of Christianity. Doctrine-wise, it's hard to sort of figure out. It doesn't have that kind of ideological component. I think it is simply about trying to keep a community together, just simply by whatever force of will. Apparently, as I said,
or rod.
Yes. It is not spared, as was shown by the little Christian college in Ontario that was operated for a while, closed about a decade ago. But it was a small, tiny little Christian college of which there are plenty in the United States. Although this one specifically had some. I suppose there is a Christian form of hazing that went on, that kind of sort of thing. That was one of the reasons why I think it had issues, and there's some lawsuits out there, I think. So that's pretty much, it doesn't try and make a lot of waves, I think. But in the case of Aaron Bushnell, as I said, when he joined the Air Force and then spent time assigned to cyber defense, whatever that means, he was a computer guy in San Antonio. He hooked up with a local, as I said, political group that, while it has been described as anarchist and communist and a variety of other things, it's a fairly well-established spin-off of a variety of Marxist-Leninist subgroups, although it is very vanguard-oriented in the sense that it does have a kind of overlap with those who are currently more Marxist, Leninist, Maoist sort of.
Hang on, he hasn't turned up here, has he? What the crap? What's going on?
Oh, bloody hell. Hello, Lane.
Hey, Lane. Just in time for appetizers.
Indeed.
Tell
us about it, Joe.
dahl. Yeah, so this is mung dahl fritters, or vada. I did not use any leavening agent, so that's just aerated dough. It could be a little fluffier, I think, if I put some leavening agent in there, it would have been a bit fluffier. But again, crispy, oh, very nice. I made apple molasses chutney and mint chutney with a little bit of molasses and coconut. And tempered it with mustard seed and red chili.
Oh God,
As long as
Very
you haven't
tasty,
mixed
super
coconut
easy.
milk. As long as you haven't mixed coconut milk with coco's nut milk.
Mm. Oh no.
Good lad. Good lad. Same shape.
Yeah. Oh, bloody hell.
Well, we have Twilight Zone a little later. John in
Indeed.
the house, want to tell us about it?
John, you want to tell us about it? John?
Yeah. So, we have another episode from the fourth season of the Twilight Zone tonight. It's a 1 hour episode starring Dana Andrews, who was quite a star. And it raises the question of baby Hitler.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Actually, Hitler's in this, playing himself.
All right.
Again.
All right.
He's actually credited on the IMDb.
Back from the bunker again.
Yeah.
How many recurring roles does Hitler have on the Twilight Zone?
He makes a few appearances, I think, in one way or another. But yeah, I like it. It's a pretty good episode, and yeah, I hope you all be there. If you like slides, you'll be happy.
Oh boy.
Following the Twilight Zone, Harsh will be showing the Discovery of India series. Harsh, did you want to talk about this one?
Sure. So in this episode, Nehru talks about caste formation, and there are 3 stories, 2 from like a popular mythology, Hindu mythology books, 1 like folklore. But I also touch a bit about shortcomings of Gandhi and Nehru in this a little bit. I'll touch a bit on that, on that, and yeah, it'll be interesting.
Cool. Look forward to it if I can stay up. I keep pegging out a little early. Well, late for me, but early for you guys. Well,
I guess we're
I
close
think
to
that's
the
it.
end. I
Yeah.
guess. Better set up that outro there.
Oh, yes, indeed.
Let me thank
Well-
the audience. Come join us at the autonomouscollective.net. Come join us. We don't try for psychological abuse, although, I suppose that doesn't hurt, so to speak.
Sometimes we can't avoid it.
Yeah. And we are a funny little community. We do have things like I even have whipped together something for our writing workshop on Saturday, which and that will occur. It's a non-Valley Vox weekend, so I will be talking at 6 o'clock about a variety of things. I think I'm going to talk about snakes. Speaking of Hitler. Snake Hitler, I think, is what I'm going to talk about. Actually, seriously,
Not handling.
no,
Proper
more
handling.
Stephen
Spiritual.
J, I'm going to talk about Stephen Jay Gould and punctuated equilibrium, which will probably bore people to tears. But come on by. We have music in the evenings on Saturday. Sunday is Weekly Marks, where we'll talk about either Lecture 6 of the Andrew Higginbottom lectures on Capital Volume 1 or some other kind of thing. And Columbo will occur. And John, if you Do you want to tease what we're going to look at Colombo on Sunday?
Sure. I can tell you a little bit about it. We're going to see. It is a episode that originally was broadcast March 31st, 1990. It is called Rest in Peace, Mrs. Colombo.
Oh God!
We
Oh my
hardly knew
goodness.
her.
But
What?
she doesn't.
Yeah,
She
She
died?
does.
she must be real if she died, right?
Does she make an appearance?
No.
Oh, it's spoiler alert.
Well, she does, but she's in a casket.
But it's not open casket.
No, not open casket.
No.
She's shy even in death.
Oh God. Well, that's the range of things we do get. On Monday there'll be sports, among other things. This and that tends to be at 6. We're going to watch a Godard film, I think, on Wednesday. Well, we'll see. It might not be a Godard film, but we're going to look at some Godard films on Wednesdays, I think, depending on what's available. And we have just other stuff. We have the Red Hour on Tuesdays. As I said, this and that on a variety of other days. We'll have other strange things before we see you next week. But let's just
And
say
I'll be doing some nature outing tomorrow. I'm not exactly sure where or what we're doing, but we will be streaming from the wilds of the Norwegian west coast for any night owls or early risers in the eastern side of the Atlantic.
there's still snow out there, right?
Yes. Well, it depends on what
Okay.
elevation. So
Oh,
that's-
okie doke.
that's
See
what
you next week.
That's what we're uncertain about. we may be more around sea level.
Well, at least there won't be any
All right.
ticks. All right.
See.
Next
All
week.
right. Take care, everyone. See ya.
Thanks, everyone. We'll try and do better.
Bye.